I'm Sam Rogalsky, and I'm doing question number 2 off of the Spring 2014 exam number 3. So this question deals with arrays, methods, for loops, and if statements, but the main part of this question is arrays and realizing the value behind the index of the array values and how to manipulate them. So the question states that assume that we have int arrays that are not fully occupied, where the 0th entry gives the number of locations being used, and the data starts with the 1th entry. So array of x, so array x sub 0 will be the number of locations being used, so that'll be 3 locations. So then x sub 1 will be the first entry, x sub 2 will be the second entry, x sub 3 will be the third entry. But if you notice, x sub 0 is 3, the number of usable entries, but x of x sub 0 or x of 3 is the last entry. So this first entry, x sub 0, gives you the index of the last usable entry. Everything after that should be zeros. So that is very important. So we're going to want to write a method called print that displays the usable part of the entry. And our method should display the error message of this if x of 0 is larger than the x.length minus 1. So if this number is larger than the length of the number of the length of the array. So to start off this program, we're going to need to start writing the method for this program. And so it'll be public static void. It's going to be void because we are not returning anything, we are only printing something, and you do not need to return anything to print inside a method. And so then we're going to have the name of the method, which will be print, and then we'll have inside these parentheses the input for this method, which will be the array that is given to us, which will be array of x. And if you see, I already put array of x in here so that we can refer to it while I'm writing this program, so I can show you guys a few things while I'm writing this program. So now inside of the method, we're going to need to start the printing of this program. And so at first, the question states that we need to display an error message if x sub 0 exceeds x.length minus 1. And if you see, x sub 0 here is referring to the number of usable entries. But say there are a certain number of entries, say 7 entries, and x sub 0 is something greater than that, 8 or 9. When we try to run this program, we're going to be comparing things, and it's going to compare to a number that is higher than the number of entries we have. So x sub 9 will be the last entry, but then it'll try to search for x sub 10, and that will return a runtime error. And so we do not want that, so we want to have a test that will avoid this runtime error. So we're going to start it with an if, and it's going to be if x sub 0 is greater, sorry, that has to be a bracket, x sub 0 is greater than x dot length minus 1. Exactly what they tell us in the question. And so x dot length minus 1 does not need to be in parentheses, because the way that this will work out is that this will happen first and then it will be compared to x sub 0. So then in this if statement, we're going to have the error message. So we're going to have system.out.println, and we're going to have exactly what they want us to write, which will be error, and then x of 0 exceeds x.length minus 1. And so then, because this is a method, we're going to have break. The break command, not break, sorry, we're not going to have the break command, we're going to have the return command. And the return command is going to exit out of this method completely and return nothing, and then bring us back into the main method. And so say that x sub 0 is greater than x.length minus 1, it's going to print this out, and it's going to return, and it's going to exit the method, and then it will not take you to do anything after this if statement. So we're going to want to start to print out the output that they want us to print. And so if you look at the output, this is very important. You need to look at the example output that they give you, and you need to tailor your code to have exactly the same output as they give you. And so if you look, it's going to be an opening bracket, x of 1, comma space x of 2, comma space x of 3, closing bracket. And so we're going to use a for loop to print out the x sub i's, so the x of 1, x of 2, x of 3. And so we want to have this opening bracket before this for loop, and so we're going to print it first. So system.out.print, and then we're going to have in quotations, the opening bracket, and we want it to be a system.out.print because we want more on this line. And so essentially it'll be a print and not a print line, because if it was a print line then it would be a opening bracket and the next line would be x sub 1, x sub 2, whatever your code has it. And so now we need the for loop, and so we need to figure out what the for loop is going to increment up to. And so if you see the data that I give you, x sub 0, which is the number of usable entries, this number, whatever x sub 0 equals, which is 3, is also the index of the last usable entry. So we're going to want to use that x sub 0. So we're going to want to store it in a variable. And so I'm going to store it into int of a. You can store it into whatever you want to, int of b, int of tree, whatever you want, doesn't matter. And so now we're going to start our for loop. So for int I, so whatever you're incrementing, I'm setting my incrementer to be I. You can set it to be B, C, D, Ralph, but it just cannot be equal to whatever you use to set x of 0 equal to. And so we're going to set this equal to 1 because our first usable data point is x of 1. And so now we're going to need to compare I to A. And so at first I had I is less than A, but this was a problem because while counting up, it would print x of I, so it would print x of 1 and then x of 2 and then would stop. But we also need to print x of 3 as well, because if you leave it I is less than A, then you're just going to print out 12, comma space 15 and then the closing bracket. But we also need this 6 as well, so we need to be less than or equal to A. So make sure that when you're done, and we will do this, that you run through your code and you go through each increment of I and check to see that your code does exactly what you want it to do. And that's how I caught my error. And then we're going to increment I, and then now we're going to have the if statements to test to see if we need to print a comma in a space or a closing bracket. So our first if statement is going to be if I is double equal to A, and this is because it's a comparison. And so what this does is if I is equal to the index of the last usable entry, and so this will ensure that we can print out x of I, which will be the last usable entry, which will be in our case 6. We can set this to print out our closing bracket as well. And so we're going to have system.out.print, and we want this to be a print because we're going to be adding more to this line, and then we're going to want it to be x sub I, and then we're going to want it to add to it the closing bracket. And then after this if, we're going to have an else statement, and we only need an else. We do not need to put anything outside the else, any conditions, because it's going to be exactly opposite of I is equal to A. It's going to be when I is not equal to A. And so you could make it an if else and write I boom equals A so that I is not equal to A, but that is essentially a waste of time on the test because you need all of the time you can get on the test, and so we're going to leave it out. And so here we're going to print system.out.print. We're going to print out x of I, and then we're going to add to it a comma and a space. And so what this will do is it'll print out x of I, and then it'll print out a comma and a space, and then when I is equal to A, it'll print out the closing bracket as well as x of I. And so now we're going to go through and check our whole code step by step and see if it gives us the desired output we want it to. So now we're going to check through all of our code to make sure everything works perfectly, and this is a very important thing to do on the exams and on the test to make sure that your code is right, since you do not have a compiler to compile your code and run it to make sure it works. So we're going to start at the top of the code, and if x of 0 is greater than x.length minus 1, then we're going to print this error statement, and then we're going to exit this method. But x of 0 is 3, and x.length minus 1 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is 8. And so 3 is not greater than 8, so we're not going to enter this if statement, and we're going to go on to the next part of the code. So we're going to print out this opening bracket, and then we're going to set int of a equal to int of x sub 0, which will be 3, so a equals 3. And so for int I equals 1, and then I is less than or equal to a, I plus plus. So 1 is less than or equal to 3. So if I equals a, which is 3, so if 1 equals 3, then we're going to print this, but it's not. So then we're going to go into this else statement, And so we're going to print x sub I, so we're going to print x of 1, which is 12. Then we're going to print a comma and a space, and then we're going to go back again to the top, to the 4, and we're going to increment I. So now I equals 2. So 2 is less than or equal to a, which is 3. But 2 is not equal to 3, so we're going to enter this else statement again, and we're going to print x of I, which is x of 2, which is 15. Then we're going to print a comma and a space, and then we're going to go back up to the top again, increment I, so I equals 3, and 3 is less than or equal to a, which is 3, and so we're going to go into this inside the for loop, and so I is equal to a, 3 is equal to 3, so then we're going to print x of I, which is 3, which is x of 3, which is 6, then we're going to print the closing bracket. And then we're going to go to the down to the bottom here and go back up to the top of the for loop, increment I one last time, and I will be equal to 4 now, and I, which is 4, is not less than or equal to a, so we're going to exit this, which will exit our method and return us to the main method, and that is the end of our program. So in preparing for an exam question like this, what you want to make sure is that you read the directions thoroughly, that you understand exactly what the method they want you to do is, exactly what the method's input is and output is. For this, the input is an array, x, and the output is nothing. It's because we're printing something. You also want to make sure that you understand exactly what the method is supposed to do, and then you want the most important aspect of these questions is to go through and test your code, every single incrementation of every single for loop, to make sure that you get exactly the output that you want to have. So let's make a variation of this question and attempt to solve it. So let's say that the question asks you to, instead of printing out the usable entries that they give you, they want you to fill in these zeros after the last usable entry. So this number is still the number of usable entries, but we want to fill in these numbers, these zeros, with the user's input, and then we want to also take this x of 0 and we want to add to it as we add numbers to it, so that it correctly reflects the number of usable entries that we have. So we're going to want to at first be able to accept user input, so we're going to have scanner scan equals new scanner system.in, and so this will ensure that we can take user input, and then we're going to want to keep that int of a storage of x sub 0 so that we can use that for later use. And so then we're going to get rid of all of this. It is also very important to note that I did not import a scanner class into this program, and that is because most programs on the tests like this, actually all programs on the tests like these that ask for user input, tell you that the scanner class has already been inputted, so that you do not need to worry about that. And also, we are using a separate method than the main method, so we would not have to worry about the importation of the scanner class, because that would happen before the main method was actually developed anyway. So we're going to need a prompt that asks the user to enter an int to replace those zeros with the user's entry. So we're going to have system.out.print, and you can have a print or a print line. I prefer print so that I can see my entry on the same line as the prompt, but if you want your entry on a different line, you would add in a print line. And then we're going to have please enter an int. And this code is going to not test. We're going to assume that the user enters an int every time, and most likely the test questions that he gives you will say that assume that the user enters an int every time, unless it tells you specifically to test for an int or for a certain numbered int or in a certain range. And so then we're going to have a for loop now that counts up so that we can fill in those numbers. So what we're going to do is we are going to start our for loop, and we're going to have int I, our incrementer, and we want to make sure that that does not, whatever this variable name is, it just cannot be equal to whatever variable you set x sub 0 equal to, and we're going to have that equal to x of 0, and we're going to have it be one more than x of 0. So x of 0 is 3, so x sub 3 will be x of 6, but we want it to be one more than that, so we want it to be x of 4, which is going to be the 0. And then we're not using the a, because what we're going to do with the a is we're going to increment a so that we also adjust this number here to the number of usable entries that we are adding to this array. And so then we're going to have I is less than x.length, and so this will ensure that we get every single one of these zeros filled. If we had x.length minus 1, we would only go to the second to last number since it's only less than. If you wanted it to make it x.length minus 1, we would make I less than or equal to x.length minus 1, and then you're going to increment I. So inside this for loop, we're going to set x of I equal to the user's input. So x of I equals scan dot next int. And so what this will do is it will take the user's next input and set it equal to x sub I. So it'll start at x of 0 plus 1, and it'll work its way up, and it will fill in every single one of those. And then also what we're going to do is we're going to set a to increment. And so at the end of this for loop, we're going to set x of 0 equal to a again. And so what this will do is this will ensure that x of 0 in this for loop does not get affected by this incrementation of a, and instead x of 0 is only affected outside of this for loop when all of the inputs are filled into these empty spaces in this array. Another thing to note about this new question is that we do not need to change the return type if they wanted us to return this new array, and that is because of pass-by value. We are only editing the pointers of this array, and so this change will also exist outside of this method. So the important part of both of these questions is reading the directions thoroughly and understanding the method that they want you to produce and the output that they want you to have. And also, the most important part of this is to understand the information that the arrays contain, because in the array that they give us in both of these questions, x of 3 is the number of usable entries, but also it is also the index of the last usable entry, and that piece of information is vital to making sure that our program is as efficient as it is, because yes, we could set both programs and count to figure out which one is the last usable entry, but then that doesn't make our method utilizable with multiple inputs. It only makes it utilizable to this certain input that has only three usable entries. And so we need to make sure that we dissect the array that they give us and understand the information and utilize it to our full capacity that we can utilize it to. Also, a very, very important part of these questions dealing with arrays, dealing with for loops, and dealing with tests and if statements is going through and checking each incrementation of your incrementers and making sure that each one gives you the desired output that you want. If you do not do this, you could have a mistake somewhere like I did in the first program with setting it just less than a instead of less than or equal to a. You could have a problem like that and miss over it completely on the test and then get 5 points off, and then instead of getting, a 90 or 95 or 100, you get, 5 points less, and that would be a big mistake that you could have caught if you just went through each incrementation and each if statement, making sure that it gives you exactly the right output that you want. Once again, I am Samuel Rogalsky, and that was question 2 off of the Spring Exam 3 in 2014. Thank you.